There comes a point when you start asking yourself quietly, why does everything feel so heavy, even when nothing's visibly wrong? You wake up, go through the motions, show up for others, but inside, there's this silent weight. Maybe it's from past mistakes, pressure to keep holding everything together, or just the sheer noise of life never giving you space to breathe. And no one really talks about this, not in a way that feels honest. But here's something the Buddha taught that cuts right through the noise. Suffering is real, yes, but so is the path out of it. Not by avoiding life or forcing fake positivity, but by transforming how we meet it. Today's video is about mastering 6 simple but powerful habits, not tricks, not hacks, but deeply rooted practices that, when lived consistently, build an emotional core so steady, even the storms of life can't shake it. These are habits that turn inner chaos into calm strength, drawn from timeless Buddhist wisdom. If that's something you've been needing, quiet strength, not just more noise, then stay with me. Don't skip ahead. Each piece we'll walk through builds towards something deeper. And if you appreciate what we're doing here, if this space brings even a moment of stillness to your day, there's one small free favor I'll ask. Hit that subscribe button. It helps us grow this mindful community and reach more people who need it just like you. Let's begin, right here, right now, together. Some mornings you wake up and it feels like the world is already ahead of you, like you're starting from behind, chasing a sense of peace that never quite arrives. The mind jumps into overdrive before your feet even touch the floor. Thoughts about the past, worries about the future, unfinished conversations, unspoken emotions, they all swirl around before the day even begins. And right there, in that small but powerful moment, is where your first real habit of strength is built. The choice to return to yourself before the world pulls you away. It's subtle, but it's everything. One of the most grounding practices I've found, and one that's deeply rooted in Buddhist teachings, is the simple act of checking in with your mind before anything else. Before the emails, before the to-do lists, before the opinions of others begin to flood your attention. Just pausing, noticing, where is my mind right now? It might be restless, scattered, heavy, or maybe even blank. That's okay. The goal isn't to fix it, it's to see it. Because awareness is the beginning of all transformation. The Buddha taught that our thoughts shape our experience of the world. This isn't just philosophy, it's practical daily wisdom. He said, with our thoughts, we make the world. And that means if we never pause to examine our thoughts, we end up living in a world shaped by fear, judgment, or distraction, without even realizing it. But when we bring mindfulness to the very start of our day, we reclaim our power. We step back into the present, into clarity, into our own center. Think of it like this. Most people live like a leaf in the wind. They're constantly blown around by whatever emotion or situation arises. But emotional strength starts when you decide to anchor your mind before you face the storm, not by suppressing what you feel, but by creating space around it. This space, this gap between stimulus and response, is where your calm begins to grow. One practice I return to almost every morning is sitting in silence for just a few minutes. No phone, no stimulation, just breath. I watch the thoughts come and go like clouds across a sky. Some are loud, some are repetitive, some are uncomfortable, but all of them pass eventually. And that's the point. You begin to see that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. The Buddha called this sati, mindful presence, and it's one of the most powerful inner resources we can develop. So when we talk about habits that make you emotionally unbreakable, we're not starting with some high-performance routine. We're starting with something far more intimate, awareness. Because if you don't know what's happening inside you, how can you choose your path forward? How can you respond to life instead of being ruled by it? This habit isn't about being perfect. Some mornings the mind is loud and restless, Some days the breath feels tight. That's okay. The win is simply in noticing, in showing up for yourself before you show up for the world. Over time, this one small practice builds inner stability. You stop being dragged by every mood, every opinion, every fear. You start living from your center, quietly, steadily, like the Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, untouched by the noise. There's a moment we've all faced when someone says something that stings, or life throws a curveball, and your chest tightens, your jaw clenches, and the heat rises before you even realize what's happening. It's fast, it's automatic, and most of us react in that moment without even thinking. We snap, we shut down, we escape into distraction. But what if that moment, right there, in the middle of the emotional surge, wasn't something to run from? What if it was actually your greatest opportunity to grow? You see, emotional strength isn't about pretending you're not affected. It's about becoming aware of the exact moment when emotion tries to take the wheel and choosing not to let it. And I say choosing with full respect for how hard that can be, because when we're overwhelmed or triggered, our brains go into survival mode. It's not personal, it's biology. But Buddhism teaches us something incredibly powerful here. Between stimulus and response, there is a sacred pause, and in that pause lives our freedom. The Buddha understood the human mind so deeply. He taught that anger, fear, craving, these are like fires that rise up quickly and burn us from within, but they don't last forever. They are impermanent, just like everything else. And when we practice mindfulness, true, present awareness, we begin to notice that our initial emotional reactions aren't always aligned with who we really want to be. They're often just habits, conditioned patterns, echoes of old stories. That's where this second habit comes in, the practice of pausing before reacting. It sounds so simple, right? But it's one of the hardest things in the world to master. Because when someone disrespects you or life doesn't go your way, your emotions scream for immediate expression, and it feels like if you don't do something right away, you'll explode. But that's the illusion. That's the trick the mind plays. What really happens when you pause, even for just a few seconds, is that you interrupt the pattern, you create space, and in that space you return to yourself. You take a breath, you observe, you ask, what's really going on here? What am I feeling? And what outcome do I truly want from this situation? That single breath is often all it takes to shift from reaction to response. This is where Buddhist teachings become incredibly practical. The Buddha didn't just teach us to meditate for peace. He taught us to cultivate insight, to see clearly without delusion. And when we see clearly, we start to understand that our emotions, while valid, don't have to lead us. They are like weather patterns, real, powerful, but passing. The more we learn to observe them without getting swept away, the more resilient we become. Let me give you something you can try. Next time you feel triggered by a comment, a delay, a memory, don't say anything. Don't act. Just breathe. Feel your feet on the ground. Inhale slowly. Name what you're feeling without judgment. I'm angry. I'm disappointed. I feel disrespected. That's it. By naming the emotion, you step into the role of the observer, and the observer has options. The observer isn't a prisoner of the feeling. Over time, this habit changes everything. You stop making choices you regret. You stop saying things that damage your peace. You begin to respond from clarity, not chaos. You become the kind of person who can hold space for discomfort without needing to fix it immediately. And that kind of strength? It's rare, it's powerful, it's deeply rooted in presence. There's this quiet heaviness that builds up when you're constantly holding back how you really feel. When you smile through things you don't agree with, say yes when you mean no, or pretend you're okay just to keep the peace. We all do it sometimes. It feels easier in the moment, right? To avoid conflict, to not make things uncomfortable. But over time, it starts to cost you something deeper, your truth. And emotional strength? It can't grow in the dark. It needs light. It needs honesty, especially honesty with yourself. Let's be real, facing your truth is hard. Sometimes it's easier to stay busy, to stay distracted, to focus on everyone else's needs instead of turning inward. Because when we turn inward, we come face to face with the things we've been avoiding. The fear, the guilt, the disappointment, the regrets. But that's exactly where your power lives. Buddhism teaches that freedom comes not from avoiding discomfort, but from seeing it clearly. The Buddha didn't become enlightened by running from suffering. He sat with it. He looked directly at it, and through that stillness came wisdom. So let me ask you, when was the last time you were really honest with yourself? Not just about the surface stuff, but about what you're truly feeling, what you deeply want, or what you've been silently tolerating. It takes real strength to say, I'm not okay with this, or this doesn't feel aligned anymore, or even, I don't recognize who I've become. But that strength is the beginning of change, the beginning of coming back to yourself. Buddhism has a word for this kind of clarity. It's called samadhi, or right view. It's the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path. And it means seeing things as they are, not as you wish they were or as you were told they should be, but as they actually are. And this begins with seeing yourself clearly, your patterns, your attachments, your tendencies to hide or hold back. Not to shame yourself, but to wake up. Because until you tell yourself the truth, you can't live from your center. You'll keep reacting from old wounds, from outdated beliefs, from a version of you that no longer fits. Being honest with yourself also means being willing to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. Maybe you don't have the answer yet. Maybe you're still figuring it out. That's okay. Truth doesn't always arrive like a lightning bolt. It often unfolds slowly, gently, as we create space for it. That's why practices like meditation and journaling are so powerful. When you sit with your breath or put your thoughts on paper, without editing or censoring, the real voice, the one underneath all the noise, starts to rise. And look, you don't need to overhaul your life overnight. Honesty begins with small things, saying, I need rest today. Or, I feel hurt and I haven't said anything. Or, this goal I'm chasing, does it still mean something to me? These little truths are like stepping stones. The more you walk them, the more your path clears, the more your inner strength grows. The Buddha once said, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. You can bury it for a while, sure. You can stay in the routine, play the role, keep your head down. But eventually, your truth will start whispering. It will come through in your restlessness, your resentment, your longing. And when you finally choose to listen, not only do you find clarity, you find peace. There's a certain kind of peace that comes from realizing you don't need to be everything for everyone. At first, it might feel strange, maybe even a little selfish, especially if you're someone who naturally gives, who steps in when others step out, who says yes even when your heart whispers no. But the truth is, emotional strength doesn't come from constantly stretching yourself thin. It comes from knowing your limits, respecting your own time and energy, and having the courage to protect them, even when it's uncomfortable. Let's talk about something that many people struggle with, often in silence: boundaries. Not the loud, aggressive kind that push others away, but the quiet, compassionate kind that say, this is where I end, and that's where you begin. In Buddhism, there's a teaching that aligns beautifully with this: ahimsa, or non-harming. We often think of it in terms of how we treat others, but it also applies to how we treat ourselves. When we constantly ignore our needs, overextend ourselves, or say yes out of guilt, we harm ourselves. And over time, that inner depletion catches up. The Buddha taught that right action begins with clarity and awareness. That includes being aware of our own capacity. He reminded us that we cannot pour from an empty cup. You can be kind, generous, and loving, And still say no. You can care deeply and still choose to protect your peace. This is not a contradiction. This is balance. This is wisdom. I remember a friend telling me about a time in her life when she was trying to do it all. Work, family, friends, community. She was always the go-to person, the one who never said no. But inside she was exhausted, resentful, disconnected from herself. She told me, "I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. I just kept doing what everyone else needed." That's when she started exploring Buddhist teachings and came across the concept of right effort, the idea that our energy is sacred and should be used wisely, not wasted on things that pull us away from our path. And that's where boundaries come in, not as a wall to keep people out, but as a guide to help you stay connected to what matters most. When you say no to what drains you, you're actually saying yes to your own well-being, to your purpose, to your peace. And from that place you can give more meaningfully, love more fully, and show up more authentically. Let's be real, it's not always easy. Setting boundaries can stir up discomfort. You might worry about disappointing people, being seen as selfish or losing relationships. But ask yourself this: is your current way of living sustainable? Are you showing up for others at the expense of showing up for yourself? Are you giving from a place of fullness or from obligation and fatigue? In Buddhist monastic life, there are clear rhythms, times of silence, times of service, times of rest. These boundaries are not rigid, they're respectful. They honor the fact that even the most compassionate hearts need space to breathe, to replenish, to reconnect. You deserve that too. So what does this look like in practice? It might mean turning down a request that feels like too much. It might mean not answering messages right away. It might mean carving out quiet time each day just for you without guilt. It's also about communicating clearly with kindness, saying, "I'd love to help, but I need to rest right now." Or, "I'm focusing on something important to me and can't commit to that." You don't need to over-explain. Your energy is enough of a reason, and here's the shift. The more you honor your own boundaries, the more others begin to respect them too. You become someone who models self-respect, and that inspires others to do the same. In time, this habit creates a life that feels less chaotic and more grounded, a life where your presence isn't constantly scattered, but centered. There's a certain kind of heaviness that builds up when we constantly carry the weight of everyone else's needs, expectations, and problems. You might not notice it at first. It starts small, saying yes when you really wanted to say no, pushing through exhaustion because you don't want to disappoint someone, answering that late-night message even though your soul is begging for rest. Over time, these little acts of self-abandonment begin to wear you down. You wake up one day feeling distant from yourself, like you've been living more for others than for your own well-being. And that's the quiet warning bell. That's when you know it's time to return to your boundaries. In Buddhism, the path to peace isn't just about meditation or silence. It's also about wisdom, prajna, and part of wisdom is knowing your limits. The Buddha taught that suffering often arises not from what happens to us, but from how we relate to it. And when we continuously overextend ourselves, give more than we have, or stay silent when we need to speak up, we create suffering, not just for ourselves, but also for others. Because when you're running on empty, even your best intentions become strained. One of the most loving things you can do for yourself and for the people around you is to set clear, compassionate boundaries. And I say compassionate because boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about honoring your energy so you can show up fully and authentically without resentment. The Buddha often spoke of the middle way, not indulging too much and not denying yourself either. Boundaries are exactly that, a middle way between isolation and overexposure. Think about this. When you say yes to something that drains you, what are you actually saying no to? Maybe it's your rest, your peace, your time with loved ones, your creative energy. Every time we ignore our inner signals, we trade something valuable. And while we might convince ourselves that we're being helpful, the truth is, long term, we're pouring from a cup that keeps getting emptier. That's not generosity. That's self-neglect, and I know it's not always easy. Saying no can feel uncomfortable, especially if you're someone who naturally wants to help, support, and be there for others. But Buddhism teaches us right speech, the ability to communicate truthfully, clearly, and kindly. Saying no can be an act of right speech when it comes from clarity, not anger. I can't take this on right now, but I care. I need time to recharge and then I'll be more present. These are not walls, they're doors that lead to more respectful, mindful relationships. One of my favorite reminders from the Buddha is this: you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Let that sink in. You deserve your own care, your own respect. And when you act from that place, others begin to mirror it. People learn how to treat us based on how we treat ourselves. When you set boundaries with grace and consistency, you're teaching the world that your well-being matters. And that's a form of inner strength that nothing can shake. A helpful practice is to take a few minutes each week to reflect. Where did I feel stretched too thin? When did I say yes out of guilt, not love? What would honoring myself have looked like in that moment? You're not judging yourself, just noticing gently. Over time, this awareness helps you speak up sooner, choose more intentionally, and live with more balance. There's a quiet kind of freedom that comes when you stop chasing after things that no longer nourish you. It doesn't happen all at once. Usually, it starts with a sense of unease, a job that drains your spirit, a relationship that feels one-sided, a habit that once brought comfort but now feels heavy. We tend to hold on far longer than we need to, not because we enjoy the pain, but because we fear what comes after the letting go. And yet it's in the very act of release that we create space for something new, something lighter, something real. In Buddhist teachings, this is the essence of non-attachment, not in a cold or disconnected way, but in a wise and loving way. The Buddha reminded us that suffering arises when we cling to people, ideas, roles, even our own past selves. That clinging becomes like a rope we grip until our hands bleed, thinking it's the only thing keeping us safe. But the truth? Often, the rope is what's holding us back. Letting go doesn't mean you didn't care, it doesn't mean your feelings weren't valid. It simply means you've come to see that holding on is no longer bringing peace, it's bringing suffering. And the Buddha was very clear. Peace begins where attachment ends. So the question becomes, what are you holding on to that is quietly weighing you down? It might be a belief that you need to prove your worth, or the hope that someone will change if you just love them harder, or the version of yourself that was always pleasing, always performing, always putting others first. These things become part of our identity. We wrap ourselves in them like armor. But over time, they stop protecting us. They start suffocating us. The sixth habit, then, is this: learning to release what no longer serves your growth. It's not dramatic. It's not a single moment of throwing everything away. It's slow, intentional, kind. It's noticing when something no longer feels aligned. It's listening to that small, persistent voice inside you that says, "This isn't who I am anymore." The Buddha often used the metaphor of the raft. When crossing a river, we use a raft to get to the other side. But once we arrive, we don't carry the raft on our back, we let it go. Many of the things we've carried, beliefs, habits, roles, have helped us in the past. They served a purpose. But when we arrive at a new chapter, clinging to them only makes the journey heavier. One beautiful practice to help with this is sitting in reflection and asking yourself, what am I holding on to that is rooted in fear, not love? And then gently, without judgment, asking, what would it look like to loosen my grip, even just a little? You don't need to leap. A soft release is enough. That's where the healing begins. And yes, letting go can feel like loss at first. Even grief, that's normal. It's okay to feel it all. But as space opens up, you'll begin to sense something else. A lightness, a calm, a quiet readiness for what's next. That's the magic of release. You stop pouring energy into things that pull you out of alignment. You return to your center, to your breath, to the present moment. Emotional strength isn't about how tightly you hold on. It's about knowing when it's time to let go and having the courage to do so with grace. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. That's the heart of Buddhist practice: clarity, compassion, and freedom. No matter where life takes you or what you're carrying today, remember this: peace is already within you, not in some distant future, but right here, right now, in this breath, in this moment. You are stronger than your doubts, gentler than your fears, and wiser than you know. Keep walking your path with presence, compassion, and courage. If this message spoke to your heart, there's another video waiting for you right on your screen that may be just what your soul needs next. I invite you to watch it and continue this journey of clarity and inner strength. Thank you for being part of this Buddhist journey. Your presence here matters. May you walk gently, live mindfully, and always return to the peace within.